Back again for another episode of High Side, Low Side. Your host, myself, Spurgeon Dunbar, and of course, Zach Quartz is joining me on the other end of the podcasting world. Zach, how is your morning going so far?
Oh, just lovely. I'm the other end of the podcasting world and the other end of the country, actually.
We're coming to you coast to coast, people. You know, we've got both of our oceans covered. And speaking of not oceans whatsoever, we are jumping into today's episode. This is episode 8 of season 5. We have got a t-shirt winner for you. We've got some fun facts in the news. We have got Patrick Garvin on as our guest today. And Zach, what is Patrick going to be talking about with us today?
We are going to talk about when you should modify your cruiser. So if you're a cruiser rider, if you're interested in becoming a cruiser rider, this is going to be a pretty broad category, but Patrick is very knowledgeable about the ways of such things, of modifying motorcycles, especially American V twins and cruisers. So we're going to talk about should you modify your motorcycle, and if so, when?
And I think it's fair to be fully transparent with you, our loving audience, to tell you that we've tried doing this podcast episode differently, and we tried doing when you should modify your motorcycle and hitting all the individual categories in one fell swoop, and it was not good. So we are coming back with a new approach where we're going to focus on cruisers in this episode, but there will be subsequent episodes where we talk about, when and why and how you might modify sport bikes, adventure bikes. You get the idea. But today we are focusing on cruisers, and then we're going to round things off with some viewer and listener comments as always. Before we do that, Zach, what do we have to do first and foremost?
Well, we have this age-old problem of too many T-shirts around, right?
No, Zach, this is the second time you've done this. My Lord Almighty, it's like you don't focus. We're going to have a talk about this.
It's like I don't remember that we have a sponsor that we need to thank. So, I'm very sorry. Let me issue a formal apology to our lovely sponsor, Motul. Quick, somebody send Motul a T-shirt.
Yeah. So Motul, actually, I was down in the garage 2 days ago, and I had gotten all of my helmets out for some spring cleaning. I had some that needed to be thrown away. I had some that just needed to be cleaned, and I got some Motul helmet cleaner out. And I went through and I cleaned up all my helmets. I threw some away.
Is this the stuff here?
Show it. Hold it up. There we go.
There you go. Yeah, I happen to have them like sitting next to my helmet cubby, so I have my helmet cleaner next to it.
The one thing that I want to say about this Motul helmet cleaner is that it smells fantastic. I actually sprayed down all my helmets, and my girlfriend came downstairs into my little basement garage, and she's like, "What are you doing down here? It smells amazing." And I don't know if that's a testament. Yeah, I don't know if it's a testament to like how bad my workship normally smells or how good it smelled after Motul, but she enjoyed the smell of it.
That's funny because I had the same experience. I cleaned the bugs off my visor the other day, and my sort of gear room is the same as my wife's workout room. And she came in and she was like, "Smells great in here." So there you go.
She thought you were taking some time to clean up her space as well, and instead you were just cleaning up your helmets.
Honestly, I didn't think it. I didn't notice it as being like particularly good smelling, but these are two case studies here. It
smells awesome, and I took actually the liner out of the inside of my helmets. I wash those with shampoo to get like the natural like hair oil out, but then I sprayed the inside of it down and I wiped it out because like with dirt bike helmets especially, like the dirt and dust gets up in there. And like after putting the helmet on again, I was like, I could get used to like closing that visor and just really enjoying the scent as it completes me. So shout out to Motul for some smelly good helmet cleaner.
We got pretty off track there, and there are presumably plenty of other reasons to purchase Motul products, not least of which they sponsor this program. But if you happen to have helmet cleaner that smells bad, Motul has got a fix for you.
Yeah. So with that out of the way, now Zach, what are we going to do? Yeah. Tell us.
Yeah. Now we get rid of one of our T-shirts. So who's reading this? Am I reading this one? You reading this one? I don't know what
Well, first and foremost, if you want a T-shirt, we encourage you all to head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It really does help with the show and help with the ratings, and also it helps with Zach and I, we can find out from you, the listener, if we're doing a good job or not. So this one came in from Old Fart Young Heart. Zach, and why don't you take it from here?
Yeah, we'll do. So, we're arguably a little confused about the name. Anyway, the subject line for this review was 22 and looking up to you, which has got a nice ring to it. I think we can agree. And then maybe it's supposed to be old heart, young fart. Is that a thing?
I think it's a Benjamin Button kind of a thing going on here. I think this person was born old and they're getting younger as they go.
Okay. Well, at any rate, however old this person is or however old they feel, it doesn't really matter. They had to say, they started listening to this podcast about the same time they got their first street legal motorcycle. They enjoy listening. None of their friends ride motorcycles, so they appreciate hanging out with people, at least virtually, who do. Old Fart Young Heart says, I daily a 1987 KLR 650. Whenever it's not freezing. Would love to hear any tips, advice on gear that would make daily riding better. So it's sort of got a tie-in with the episode today about modifications, but we thought this would be a fun one to sort of it's a quick question, but we can just address a couple things real quick.
Yeah, and I would say to Old Fart Young Heart, make sure you're paying attention to the podcast. So we get into the ADV modification episode, we can really hit this home for you. But I would say that advice on gear that would make daily riding better. And I think some of this we probably touched on a little bit with the episode with Ari Henning on luggage and taking trips and how to modify your bike some way that way. But I would say making sure that the windscreen that you have on your bike is adequate. I think Zach and I have talked about this often and we'll probably talk about it a little bit in this episode, where if the windscreen is inappropriate, it's causing crazy buffeting and your head feels like it's shaking all over the place. The other part of that would be handguards. On a KLR 650, I think we oftentimes think of aluminum back handguards to protect your levers in the event of a crash. But keep in mind, you can have wind blocking shields on there as well to help keep your hands a little bit warmer as you travel.
Right. I also would not hesitate to look into electronic help. So heated grips or heated vest, like a plug-in heated vest, even a battery-operated heated vest, which are pretty good depending on how long you're riding. If you just have a quick commute and it's just kind of chilly sometimes, battery-operated heated vests are kind of nice. You can just throw them on. There's got heating panels usually in the chest and across the back, and it just puts a little charge of heat into your core and helps keep you toasty.
That's also a good note, considering an 87 KLR 650 might not have the electrical capacity to do one off of the bike itself. So
I think it should, right? I don't know.
I think it might be able to handle the heated grips. I don't know if it's going to handle a 120 volt vest.
That's true.
Yeah.
Anyway, those are some things to keep in mind. So hopefully that helps. And thanks for the review. And please do remember, of course, to send your preferred t-shirt size and mailing address to highsidelowside@RevZilla.com.
And make sure you subscribe to the podcast, Old Fart Young Heart, so that when we get to the episode about modifying adventure bikes, you can listen with great intent.
And bask in it.
All right.
News?
The news.
Yes.
So I want to start off. I'm gonna kick things off with something that's not on the list. So
okay.
I recently,
news item.
At the time that this is released, I have celebrated my 39th birthday.
Wow.
And producer Chase got me a present.
Did he now?
And I just wanted to share this with the audience. Zach didn't give me a present for what it's worth.
Nope,
but producer Chase got me KTM underwear. And I thought this was fitting. Not just one, not just two, not just three, but a 5-pack of KTM boxer briefs. And there's actually a picture on the back of all 5 pairs. So in case you were wondering what it looks like, it's got a little KTM orange band up top, and the area that supports myself is in black, and then there's a little KTM logo down on the left side of the trunk there as well. So
now are those underwear ready to race? Would you say, or?
Well, they're a thick stretch band of Kamada, whatever that is, but they do have a breathable material that is, actually, I'm realizing now that this is Spanish on the bottom, so it's material respirata is breathable material, and then a comfort stretch stitch. So
wow. Well, that is a very thoughtful gift, Producer Chase. I have a tip of the cap. That's an excellent gift.
Yeah.
Mine's in the mail, Spurgeon. It should be there in 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, I would say about as quickly as I got you that Motul gift pack.
Exactly. All right. Well, happy birthday to Spurgeon, and rest assured, everyone, his grundle will be breathing.
Oh my God! Move on in the news. Move on. Next thing in the news.
In his new KTM underwear. Quick shout out to our friend Ari Henning, who not long ago, well, maybe about a month ago now that. Well, by the time you're listening to this, published a video called How to Ride with a Passenger, an episode of the Shop Manual Show that he does on YouTube. And we thought this was appropriate for the high side, low side audience because we did get a fair amount of blowback, you might say, when we covered How to Ride with a Passenger on this program. People said we didn't do it right. So, or, you know, there was, we
didn't go far enough in depth, basically.
Right. We left some stones unturned. Ari Henning always does quite a good job with the shop manual, so check out that episode and you know, leave an angry comment for him too if you want to. I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, don't just throw your rage at us, internet.
Yeah.
Go after Ari Henning once in a while as well.
Yeah. Anyway, check it out.
Yeah, basically. So by the time, you know, kind of moving right along with some of the housekeeping measures here, by the time you're watching this, Get On Adventure Fest in the Mojave Desert is behind us. I'm presuming that Zach and I had a great time with all of you that showed up. But more importantly, for those of you that weren't able to make it out to the Mojave, fear not, there is Get On Adventure Fest in the Black Hills outside of Sturgis, South Dakota. This is going to be July 14th through 17th. I was there last year. It was absolutely some of the best riding that I have done in recent memory. Great off-road riding, great street riding. So just because it says Get On Adventure Fest doesn't mean you can't come out and do an awesome 3 days of riding some really great scenic roads and just kind of leaving the off-road stuff to other people. And then if you want to get in there and get dirty and see some amazing trails, there's like, I don't know, thousands of rideable trails, and we've got it all mapped out for you. There's training programs. You can come and have a great experience with us July 14th through the 17th. You can check out RevZilla.com/fest to get all of the information that you might need for that.
Couldn't have said it better myself, my friend. Yeah, I sure hope we had a good time at that Get On Adventure Fest.
I can't imagine why we wouldn't, unless I've broken something and we don't know about that yet. I mean, we're coming at you from the future, so.
True. So, last little bit here, some call outs to some new motorcycles that have come out. We're in the midst of a lot of bikes being tested for the first time or covers being pulled off them. And Spurge, you recently laid eyes on that Ducati Desert X. Right?
I did.
Tell the people what that is and what you thought.
So for those of you Ducati riders out there, you might have been invited recently. Ducati's doing a tour around North America. Mm-hmm. And they're showcasing some of the new bikes in their lineup, one of which is the Ducati Desert X that they have on display. So a couple things here. When that bike was first announced, I really thought it was going to be going after more of the smaller middleweight crowd. I thought it was going to be going after KTM's 890, the Touareg 660, the Tenere 700. But based on the price, which is about $16,800, give or take, and the weight, which is just shy of roughly 500 pounds, it seems to me that it's somewhere in between the smaller middleweights and the larger middleweights. It seems like it's not quite as expensive as like a Tiger 900 Rally Pro or a BMW F850 GS, but it's comparable to more of like that weight, that weight of the bigger middleweights. But then really it's something that's going to be priced a little bit more expensive than a KTM, and it's going to be heavier than a Tenere or a Touareg. So it's sitting somewhere right smack dab in the middle of the middleweight adventure segment.
The middle.
I
think it's interesting because what it seems like is going to happen is everyone, you know, I feel like the fad of huge adventure bikes is not coming to a close, but it's waning a little bit. Whereas the medium-sized bikes, the T7s, the Touaregs, the KTM 890s, they seem like they're what's the opposite of waning? Waxing, right? Anyway, they're on the rise, and I think that Ducati is sort of like trying to strike with this luxury-esque mid-sized bike that's like a little bigger and a little more powerful and a little kind of like more alluring than some of the middleweight bikes, but also not huge still. So it's an interesting thing. It's like, bikes always kind of grow, and then there's a subset that grows beneath them, and Ducati's aiming in this kind of middle area, and I think it kind of makes sense, right? I think it's actually very similar to the Tiger 900, because the Tiger 900 Rally is not the full size bike, but it has all the features, right? It has all of the stuff that the big bike has.
Yeah, basically. And I think we're gonna talk about that here in 2 seconds, because I know that you just got back from riding the Tiger 1200, but that was my example here, because really the only difference between those two motorcycles, the Tiger 900 Rally Pro and the new Tiger 1200, is displacement, right? Like that 900 has all the bells and whistles you could ever want from a luxury motorcycle. And I'm going to tell you a secret, just you and me.
Oh, okay. Don't tell anyone, anybody.
I'm just going to keep it between you and me.
Yep.
I have been a big advocate for a long time of like the smaller middleweights.
Yes.
And I recently purchased an 890 and I got rid of my 1090.
To be clear, this is a 890 Adventure from KTM.
Yep, I got a KTM 890 Adventure R Rally, right. And then I had sold my KTM 1090 Adventure R. And while the 890 is a very fine machine and it's a fine-tuned weapon for what I like to do, which is riding adventure bikes off-road,
yep,
there is something that I miss about the 1090. There is something about
interesting
the engine sound and the feel and the torque and the performance that, like,
I see. So
I
you
like
miss the big gun,
but
huh?
I do. There are times where I find myself wanting a bigger hammer. And
gotcha. Interesting. Wow.
I would have never, if you would have asked me that before this shift where I'm actually stepping back now, I would have been like, no, smaller is absolutely 100% better.
Right.
And I think it's better for what I do. Don't get me wrong. I'm very happy with my purchase.
Right.
But there's just every now and then you go to crank back on the throttle and there's some of the sound is missing. Some of the feel is missing. And it's just not as neck snappy, So.
Old Spurgeon Dunbar likes a good neck snap now and again. Anyway, I think that's big of you to admit, to be honest, because it's one thing for us to sit here and parrot the whole no, smaller can be just as good. But you have it. This is an actual you had the actual experience of getting a smaller bike and being like, I kind of miss the bigger engine.
So speaking of the bigger engine, you just got back from riding the Tiger 1200.
Yes.
You had all the torque at your fingertips.
Yes.
How'd you like that bike?
This is a big step forward for the Tiger 1200 because historically, I think the bike has been kind of a big, nice, luxurious sport touring bike dressed up like a BMW GS, basically. Dressed up like an adventure bike. It wasn't really, you didn't really want to hammer it down a dirt road or anything.
You could, but it wasn't.
You
it wasn't
could,
the
but
right.
it wasn't
the right bike.
No,
yeah.
you didn't want to jump it or do anything like that. And this new Tiger 1200 is it's a big step forward. The engine displacement is smaller, but it makes more power. They took Triumph took that T-plane firing order from that they started using on the Tiger 900 and the Tiger 850 Sport, and now they're using it in the Tiger 1200 as well. So the engine's kind of sounds and feels a little different. And
they cut 50 pounds off of it, right?
Wasn't 55 pounds lighter.
Ooh,
yeah, is what they claim. So that's a big deal. So and it's still a decent sport touring bike. I didn't sport touring wise. I kind of on pavement. I was left a little bit cold. I'd still get a GS or never mind something like a KTM 1290 Super Adventure S or a Multistrada V4S or something like that. I mean, those are like really sporty adventure bikes for the road. But off-road, I think that Tiger is really in with a shout. It really it could be it did some things better, I think, than a GS. It feels lighter and more agile, and it's certainly a better off-road bike than the Ducati or even like a Yamaha Super Tenere or something like that. So
That's awesome,
it's big step forward for Triumph, and I think it's I'll be excited for you to try it and to see how the market responds to it.
Yeah, because I think for me that was the big kudos that I had for Triumph. For the audience that's listening, I used to own a 2015 Tiger 800 XCX. I had that bike for like 3 years. I sold it, got in the KTM thing, but when I went to the press launch for the Tiger 900, I was blown away with how good Triumph had made that bike. They took what was a very long in the tooth model and they went ground up. And for those of you out there that have ridden the Tiger 900, especially if you've ridden it back to back with the Tiger 800, there really isn't a comparison. I think you hit on that T-plane crank. That's a really impressive movement. I think sometimes we hear manufacturers talk about certain changes and it almost sounds like marketing speak, but the T-plane crank really did help to put traction down at the rear wheel better, and it just really changed the entire feel of that motorcycle. So again, kudos to everything that Triumph has been doing. One of the other bikes that was announced recently was a Royal Enfield Scram 411. And for as impressed as I've been with Triumph, I would say that
you're
Royal
such a
Enfield,
hater for Royal Enfield.
No, I don't hate it, but like here's the problem that I have with the Royal Enfield Scram 411. I can't imagine this is anything that drastically different than a Himalayan.
Well,
right?
yeah, and just to take a quick pause, if you
for
know
it.
what a Royal Enfield Himalayan is, the Scram 411 is that, except doesn't have a windshield on it. That's
And
what
a
it
different
looks- I mean,
paint
it's-
job.
Yeah, and a different paint. It's pretty clearly the same bike.
So here's the problem that I have is that the marketing, all the marketing photos and stuff came out, and it's like somebody's launching this bike off of a giant dirt berm flying through like 12 feet in the air. And I'm like, there's no way. Like there's no, like any of you Himalayan owners out there, let me know how good it is at like jumping it off of like a giant berm and give me your honest feedback on that. Cause like, if you want to talk about like, hey, it's good to like putt around down a dirt road and it's like a tractor and it's reliable compared to a Royal Enfield from 30 years ago, I'm willing to hear all of that. But like, do I want to go and take this and jump it and trust that the 6 inches of suspension travel with a spring weight for like a 94-pound ballerina is going to like be able to withstand that when I land? No. And I think it's a testament to the fact that you can jump anything, but you can't land everything. and that's kind of how my feelings are around the marketing material, at least for the Scram.
So, but otherwise okay?
No,
With
I
the
don't want to.
Scram.
No, I mean if it's anything like the Himalayan, I don't. No,
Yeah. I like
you like it though. You disagree with me. So
Well, I like the Himalayan for what it is, and I think that, but the Scram 411 I'm a little underwhelmed by. To call it a new model is a real stretch. However, one motorcycle I am very excited about is the Honda Dax, which is being released in Europe. I think not in the United States, but essentially it's yet another Honda Minimoto, and uses the same 125cc engine from the Grom, the Super Cub, the Monkey, the Trail 125, etc. But it's a little CT70 knockoff kind of, like it looks like a little 70s.
They
mini
modeled
bike.
it after a CT70, and it looks the part. Like
It's great. I mean, it looks great.
Honda's coming out with all these awesome little small displacement bikes, and they're kind of cornering the market because other than like, I don't know, like a Z125, who else is doing all these fun, cool, little quirky small bikes?
Yeah, just like CSC or like Chinese Benelli.
Yeah.
Like that's the only other competition you have. And I mean, if you're gonna get a bike like this anyway, like
Get a Honda.
Get a Honda. Like,
Yeah, there's a
I don't see why
dealership in
you
every
wouldn't.
single small town across America. They sell
Exactly.
generators and Daxes. Like, and if you haven't seen the marketing for this yet, they're going pretty heavy into like the wiener dog marketing, which
I noticed that.
I don't remember that being anything to do with like. I don't think that's
Yeah.
like a throwback to a CT70 in any way. I think it's just something new.
I don't remember. Maybe we're not old enough to remember the marketing for CT70s.
Or
but
maybe Europeans love wiener dogs. I don't. Maybe this is like a strictly European thing. You know, like in America, there was like a Super Hawk and a firestorm, or was it what was the what we call it? It was a CB1000, and then like a
No, you're talking about the Fireblade?
Fireblade. Thank
The
you.
Fireblade
Yeah.
is what they call it in Europe.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So
Okay,
like,
yeah, gotcha.
Honda has a reputation of giving us different names in America. So maybe like the wiener dog is something that's like it really resonates with the European audience, and then America they'll make it like a pit bull. Like Mack trucks, American made.
Little Honda Pitbull.
That's a bulldog.
Anyway,
That's a bulldog.
cool-
Sorry,
cool
not a
look.
pit bull. I've got to get my dogs right. Get my dogs in order.
Anyway, look for coverage on all of those machines at Common Tread, because someone has done an excellent job writing articles about them. We promise.
And we have one final little piece of news, but I think we should bring Patrick on for this one because it plays into the cruiser theme that we're talking about today.
It kind of does, yeah. This is Harley Davidson news, and he's sort of our resident American V-twin guy. So yeah, let's get him in here. Let's talk about it.
Boom. All right, so we have Patrick Garvin on the show with us today. Patrick, welcome as always.
Hey, thanks for having me back. I really appreciate it, guys. Love talking to you.
You sound so enthusiastic, like you really mean that.
I do. I really mean it. I mean, like, one of my favorite things to do is just bench race, and this is a great place to do it.
So speaking of bench racing, we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of this in a second, but we wanted to bring you on for a little piece of Harley Davidson news. So it does look like some documents are being published in the U.S. around possibly pushing forward a new small displacement Harley Davidson. This is going to be a little parallel twin, roughly 300 cc's in displacement. They're going to call it a 338R from what it looks like. And it kind of has like a small little sport bike look to it. So I want to kind of do a guest honors thing here. Like, what are your thoughts around this?
I kind of remember this from a couple of years ago when it was floated. I'm pretty excited about it. I hope that it was made. Was it supposed to come to the States? Because that would be awesome.
So from what the research that I did was that there was a VIN number assigned to it, or they applied for a VIN number with the Department of Transportation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. I feel like I remember this too, and sort of, and it's so, to be clear, it's a small displacement 300 or 400 class parallel twin, and it's made in China. Is that right?
It's built in conjunction with Qinjiang. Can
you say that again,
Motors?
please?
No, I can't say it again. Shut up. But it's a small. It's built in conjunction with a small Chinese firm, or a Chinese firm. I don't know if they're a small Chinese firm.
And in China, it's probably very large.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, so it's a partnership though with a Chinese organization to build and produce this motorcycle outside of the U.S. But it looks like they're going to bring it into the U.S.
So I'm surprised to hear that you say you're excited about it, Patrick. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, partially because I love parallel twins. I think that's a great.
Really?
Yeah, especially in a small displacement like that. I mean, with especially like the MT-07 platform that they're using all over the place, and traditionally Harley's only ran the V-twins, but I love the idea of that little small parallel twin. I mean, and small displacement bikes just generally are just tons and tons of fun.
True.
So I hope this one, kind of lives up to the small displacement twin hype. But I mean, the track record with Harley and small displacement bikes, isn't great.
What were the last? What were the two small cruisers that it just built? The little parallel twin.
The street. No, they were V-twins. It was a Street 500 and a Street 750, right? Is that what you're thinking of?
Yeah, and they were terrible.
Yeah, they really were.
Before that, I mean, even going back to, not a twin, obviously, but a Buell Blast, that wasn't exactly a raging success.
That was a 500 single, right?
500 single.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, just, I don't know if you ever spent any time around one of those. They're really weird as far as like the frame and subframe setup.
Right.
It's just a really odd, not well put together motorcycle.
Kinda typical Buell, like doing it a little different, like rethinking the whole thing.
Right. Yeah, and I think part of the problem with the XG platform, the 500s and 750s, was in part price, because what they were up against in small displacement market, like you could get so much more for less money elsewhere.
I think they were banking heavily on people wanting the Harley Davidson name, and I think for beginner riders, when they're looking at a middle displacement cruiser, you can get a used Honda Shadow 750 or Honda Shadow 600 for like nothing.
But even how much was a Street 750? Like $6,500 or something, maybe.
I think they were up around $7,000.
I thought it was
an 883 iron from Harley, which is a quote unquote real Harley Davidson, a 45-degree air cooled V twin that goes back decades and decades, is like 8,500 or something, $9,000 or something, right?
Yeah, or I mean, used market.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
I mean, you go buy a Evo Sportster, you can get them off Craigslist for $2,500.
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
I think the biggest problem that I had with those street bikes, so was like the brakes weren't good, the performance wasn't great, like
the brakes
had some
were
real
miserable.
problems. Yeah.
Yeah, even like the switch housings in that were really. I mean, you don't expect a lot out of like a entry level bike, but I mean, fit and finish on it was just real bad.
So then, what do we think? So bringing it back to this, Harley building a small, not cruiser-esque, sport naked style parallel twin. Like Zach, you don't sound convinced on this. You sound like maybe this isn't going to be your cup of tea.
I just haven't seen a budget bike like this that's made in China that I have ridden or seen that I thought, wow, this is really nice. And wow, I would have this instead of a Honda CB300R or instead of a Yamaha MT-03 or a Kawasaki Z400. Yeah, which are just like really nicely built bikes, and they work well. And so yeah, I'm very skeptical that it'll work. And I'm surprised. I would be so surprised to see Harley Davidson attach its name to something like that and try to sell it to the American market. But maybe it's different enough because it's not a V-twin, because it's something completely different. Maybe Harley Davidson feels like it would get away with that, or not get away with it, but sort of people would be more accepting. I don't know. Is that crazy?
I think the example that I want to throw out is specifically the Benelli. So the Benelli 300 is, they literally took
TNT 300, right?
TNT 300, yep. Took a Chinese motorcycle, slapped a Benelli name on it, and sold it to the American public for pretty much the same price as a Z400. And if you compare those bikes side by side, there's absolutely no comparison. The Kawasaki stomps it. And I know this because we have a Benelli 300 sitting out in the lobby of our office right now.
They're not very good.
So if Harley Davidson creates this partnership and they handle the quality control and they do it right, I think they could have a very competitive bike on their hand. If they take the same approach they took to the Street 500 and the Street 750, and they let the Chinese firm just have complete go at it, and they bring something over similar to a Benelli 300 with a Harley Davidson badge on the tank, I think it's going to be a hot pile of garbage. Is my concern.
Yeah, I would agree. The fit and finish has to be there. But as far as like selling it to the Harley Davidson faithful, I would say like 3 years ago, if you'd have told me that Harley was going to sell adventure bikes, and if 8 years ago you'd have told me Harley Davidson was going to sell electric bikes, I wouldn't. That would just, both of them would have been shockers. So like, I think the opportunity's there to sell the bike, but I agree it's got to be a decent motorcycle.
Well, both of those bikes, like the Livewire and the Pan America, are just awesome motorcycles. Like Harley Davidson built a fantastic bike with both of those examples.
Right.
So,
and they didn't build it in China.
Well, and that's my point here, is that if the biggest advantage that Harley Davidson has is a dealership everywhere. Where can you go in America and not see a Harley Davidson dealership? So
that's true.
If they can put a quality machine on the floor that speaks to beginner riders that costs sub $5,000, then regardless of whether or not you are already a Harley Davidson aficionado or not, like, you've just got a really viable, strong product. And I think that's what's going to be the make or break here.
Yeah. Well, go ahead, Patrick.
Sorry. And then the other thing about Harley is like,
don't you ever apologize. Don't you ever do it.
Harley, typically if you get somebody on a Harley, if you start them on a Harley Davidson, they are really, really likely to buy another Harley and move up that chain of, bigger and bigger bikes, where that maybe not the case with other manufacturers. So you think Harley would really put some, effort into making this a good bike to get people on it, because it's going to pay dividends down the road.
Then again, that's an interesting point too. I wonder if you have a parallel twin 400 class bike with a Harley badge on it, and it's actually pretty good. It's actually pretty fun. And someone comes into a Harley Davidson dealership and they say, I want this bike, and they sold it and they ride it and they think this is great. And then they're like, okay, well, now I want a bigger version of this. Yeah. Then I guess I get an MT-07, right, from Yamaha, or maybe they build the Bronx. I don't know.
No, but maybe this is where Harley Davidson is starting with this particular bike, and then maybe we get to see them build a Bronx. Because I agree with you. And also the way the whole move up in displacement works is that you have to be really impressed with your first experience. Because I agree with you, Patrick, but I say that that's one of the things that Honda does really well. I think that a lot of the Japanese manufacturers, you can work right up the line. So if you get a Z400 and you're impressed, well, then you're probably going to be looking at a Z650 or a Z900, and you want to move up. And to Zach, I agree with you. I think if you get hooked on this and it is a good bike, where do you go up in Harley's lineup for this? And they really don't have anything else. It's the next step up that looks and feels like a little tiny sport bike, but bigger.
Well, I guess in some ways we're getting ahead of ourselves because it's not even on showroom floors.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's the podcast for today. Thanks so much for sticking around, Patrick.
So let's jump in at this point to so the theme of the episode here is when, why, how you would modify a cruiser. And the one thing that I want to say is that like we were trying to figure out our categories, and in addition to just traditional cruisers and touring bikes, we want to include certain standards, right? If you look at what a definition of a standard motorcycle is in America, it's an upright seating position. And it includes everything from a KTM Super Duke 1290, which is essentially a hot rod of a sport bike, to a Triumph Bonneville or a Street Twin. And those two bikes are not the same. So what we want to do is we want to split the standard segment right down the middle. And in addition to talking about modifying cruisers, we're also going to talk about possibly Triumph Bonnevilles or maybe a Kawasaki W800, which is now not a W800. Yeah, it used to be a W650, now it's a W800. You get the idea. So like, just comfortable upright seating positions, cruisers, which is maybe a little bit more of a lower seat height. Maybe sometimes your feet are out in front of you. That's what we're talking about modifying today. That sound right to you, gentlemen?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that makes sense.
Let's do it.
Yeah. Right. So I think I'm not sure where a good place to start is, but I feel like we should start with some really basic, some kind of like, I don't know, basic stuff that you would advise anyone who getting into motorcycling to look for, like kind of right off the bat. If someone, like, we're talking for very beginner situation. So someone's just sort of like, I don't know, I just got my first motorcycle. And this applies to cruisers, but could apply to other things. Like, is there something that you would say, aside from a helmet, is there something, to do with the bike that you would say, like,
well, let's give a fake example, right? How about like,
okay.
Johnny has bought a Harley Davidson 883 Sportster. It is used, but it's bone stock used, right? And Johnny doesn't have a ton of extra money, but he likes riding it back and forth to work, and maybe once or twice a year, he's going to take a trip with the bike. What would you recommend, Patrick, from a starting point for young Johnny here?
Yeah, I think the examples are important because this is such a broad topic, and it's going to be subjective to your experience level and what your goals are with the bike. So something like who we're talking about now, I think simple things like a seat and suspension, where normally I think when people think of suspension on motorcycles, it's a pretty like big lift to change your suspension. Well, specifically on a Harley, since they're like a twin shock model, it's literally 4 bolts. This is something that I think a beginner could do with hand tools in their garage, and is such a big upgrade on Harleys because the suspension is such trash, especially on the older models. I mean, like those things they're just useless hanging off the sides of this bike. So a suspension upgrade, something like a seat, which is going to make them feel more comfortable on the bike, and then you could go back and forth there. You could, depending on how or where you're riding it, if you're taking longer trips, maybe wind protection, Memphis Shades, windscreen or fairing you can clip on and off, or possibly a bag of some sort to put on the bike is going to be really helpful. But I think a seat and suspension are right up there, making them feel more comfortable on the motorcycle.
How I don't know if you know this off the top of your head. I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but how much would Johnny need to spend? Do you think, approximately ballpark, on suspension for his new his new used 883 iron that he just got?
Yeah, so I'm just talking about the rear suspension right now, and there's a pretty big window there. Anywhere from $300 to $1,400, and he doesn't need $1,400 shocks. I mean, if you want to get up into like the remote reservoir, Fox or Legends, that's great. But I mean, they make entry level shocks. Progressive and Burley makes some entry level stuff that not only does it work better, it gives you ride height options, which I think are important depending on how tall or short you are. You know what I mean? Getting your feet on the ground, with a little bit shorter suspension, or maybe raising it up a little bit for clearance. It allows you to tune that bike a little more to yourself and your riding style.
The other part of that too is I think by buying an aftermarket shock, you can get the right springs for your rider weight. And again, I don't think you have to break the bank. Like, I know when I put a new set of rear shocks on my old T100, I got a set of like the basic Öhlins for, I think it was at the time like $450-$500, which is a considerable amount of money. But you can, like Patrick said, you can install it yourself, and it is a big upgrade. Now, if Johnny spent $3,000 on his Sportster 883, then, $500 shocks might seem a bit egregious, but I do think that it does make a big difference from a comfort standpoint and a performance standpoint. I think that a lot of times we think about, suspension as purely a performance upgrade, but, if you've got a blown set of shocks that are old and worn out, there's a lot of comfort that comes with that as well.
Right. How much ride height would, like $300, $400 set of shocks to go on an old 883 iron or something like that, or an older air-cooled Sportster? How much would that, what kind of ride height are you talking? Will it go up like an inch or more than that?
You could go up to 2. So like Burley Stilettos, or you can get a 15-inch shock, where I think it depends on the model of Harley, right? Like
sure.
The Huggers had shorter suspension, but let's say the average shock length on a Sportster is 11 inches. You could go up to a 15.
Wow.
Or down to like a 10.
Okay.
So there's quite a range there. Right.
What about one thing I wanted to mention for someone like this, because I think that especially if you're new to motorcycling, and you've leaned toward cruisers or something like it, you might not be aware of the potential options for sizing a bike to fit you a little bit, and cruisers can be, there can be a wide disparity in ergonomics, right? Like how far in front of you your feet are, or where the handlebars are. And I know for me, cruisers are kind of it's a delicate balance, because if the pegs are too far, if it's really foot forward, then I find myself a little bit uneasy riding. But if the foot pegs are too far back, then I don't have leg room because I'm sort of a taller person. So fooling with foot pegs on something like we're talking about Johnny's bike here, an air-cooled Sportster from a few years ago, how difficult is it? I've never actually done that. I assume it's not that hard to fool with like foot position.
Yeah, so going from like a forward control, which is kind of traditionally what Harley's had, back to a mid control, is actually it's kind of a lift, to be honest with you.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So luckily mid controls are kind of more back in vogue than they were in the past years. So you're seeing a lot more bikes come out with them, whereas before the default was kind of forward controls. So the reason it's more of a lift, let's say, on a Sportster it would be the easiest, but you have to change like the linkage that runs from the master cylinder up to the actual pedal. You have to change that.
For the rear brake, yep.
Yep. There's some other things. So like on a Sportster, you have to take the sprocket cover off to put the mid control on, and pipe may be in the way. You have to there's exhaust, considerations here. Some exhausts are made for a forward control or mid control. Now,
whoa.
Not so much now. The exhaust company is getting smarter and making them to fit both. But you could potentially, your exhaust could be in the way. If you're on a big twin, the inner primary is where the shifter comes through, and then on a mid control. If you don't have that inner primary set up, that may be a very big job. So if you have a forward control without that hole in the inner and outer primary, you have to change that whole inner and outer primary setup.
It sounds like what we're saying here is that this is beyond a beginner. This is beyond a beginner modification. And that's
Johnny's not too smart.
Yeah.
To be honest, I never knew foot pegs could be so complicated. This is fascinating.
But time out, because this is where we get back to, there are certain considerations you need to make before you even buy a motorcycle. And this 100%. Is kind of where, we talked about like standards. I think sometimes we've seen some comments come through where there's been some critique about our love of cruisers. But I want to go on record and say that,
the lack thereof.
My first bike was a T100, which is a Triumph Bonneville, and I bought it with a cruiser ethos in mind. Like, I just wanted to go on trips and have a good time and just ride it around town.
Impress the ladies.
But of course, but I also liked a mid control. I liked my feet underneath me. I like sitting upright. I didn't like sitting slouched down. I'm a taller rider, so to me, a standard motorcycle does have that tie-in with a cruiser. But I think for people that are looking for something that maybe has a mid control, instead of trying to buy a Sportster 83 and modify it, if that's something that Johnny would have been in consideration for, it sounds like Johnny just bought the wrong bike.
Well, like I said, Johnny's not that smart, so But no, that's a good point. Go ahead, Patrick.
So a little pro tip from a guy who spent way more money on modifications than he has on the motorcycles is like when you're buying a bike, especially a used bike, and more specifically a Harley. Honestly, buying the base model is, I think, better for modification, especially in the long term, because most of the base model Harley, so to speak, those were the mid-control bikes. The forward control bikes were the upgraded bike. And a lot of times, most of the factory options on Harleys that you would pay a little more money for, you're probably going to change anyway. So I would say if you're looking for that bike, if Johnny's looking to buy that bike, save yourself a little money and buy the base model bike, and then make those changes to it down the road. Spend your money on your changes.
Well, the other thing
Sort of
too is
grow
that if
into
you're
it,
talking if you're talking about modifying a suspension, so it's a 15-inch suspension and you're raising the seat height up, that's where you might just want to consider a standard too, because there's a lot of standards out there that have a taller seat height that give you the mid controls and still again possess the ethos of what a cruiser really is,
and to a certain extent the aesthetic, right?
Totally.
Something like in my opinion, an air cooled Sportster from a few years ago, an 883 Iron or a what do they call it, the 48 Special or
48,
whatever. The 48. Those bikes look awesome. I mean that's like a classic Harley Davidson look and sound and feel, and I think it's excellent. I think it's interesting, like you say, Spurge, something like a T100 or a T120 or a Street Twin, in that family of Bonnevilles. In some ways, it reaches for a similar thing, right? It reaches for an old look, but the position, the riding position, as you said, is a lot different.
I can't tell you how many times I've been in a gas station and people come up and they're like, that bike just looks cool. It looks like a motorcycle, right? And I think that's why a lot of people gravitate towards cruisers in general. Is there's an aesthetic there. It looks like a
100%.
motorcycle to a lot of people. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to move on to our next case study, if you gentlemen don't mind.
Well, hold on. Let's round this out. So,
sorry.
Beginner riders, you're mostly just riding around town. You want to try getting into, a couple different modifications because you have the idea of taking a trip from time to time. We talked about some of Patrick's thoughts here, but Zach, do you have anything that you'd like to round out as far as recommendations that you would make for beginner Johnny riding back and forth to town, maybe taking a longer trip?
Beginner Johnny. No, Johnny's not taking any trips. He's not smart enough. We talked about this.
No, I think he might try one or two. No, he's not
taking any trips. Trust me, Spurge. It's the next
He's
case
not?
study is taking trips.
Johnny's not taking trips, you say.
There we go.
All right. Johnny's just riding around town.
Anyway,
Poor Johnny.
We're making this up as we go along, listeners.
No, so I think I like what Patrick said. I think that makes sense. I think I think you both made the points that I really wanted to get across, which is you keep in mind the bike that you want to buy. A cruiser can be a different thing. It doesn't have to be an American V-twin. A cruiser can be something slightly different than that. And also, just sort of the basic stuff. I'm glad we had that conversation about foot controls. That's something that if I had a friend who was new to it and they'd just gotten a bike like that, I would have said just try some different foot position. That'll be easy. But I didn't know it was so hard. So I'm glad we had that conversation. And then something like a seat is a basic comfort for bopping around town and getting used to your new motorcycle and your new pastime. I think is absolutely the right thing to do.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, I think the one thing that none of us mentioned, for a beginner mod was an exhaust, which I think there's a reason for that. I think oftentimes a lot of people end up going out and spending, $500-600 on an exhaust as the first modification out of the gate. And I'm speaking from being guilty as charged. And I remember I was taking my first motorcycle trip up to Maine, and about couple 100 miles in, I was like, I am so uncomfortable. I am miserable. I don't have a windshield. I don't have a comfortable seat, but I have an exhaust that sounds freaking awesome. And in that moment, I would have changed that exhaust out for a little windscreen and a seat. So if you're listening to this and you are a new rider, this is definitely one of those moments where you can learn from our mistakes a little bit in the past, because I do think a little windscreen and a seat go such a long way in making sure that you're comfortable on the motorcycle that you're using.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Good point.
And I do like the idea, Patrick mentioned this specifically, but a clip-on windscreen. So if you're just riding around town, you can just pull that off and you don't need it. But if you do want to, cruise down the highway, or maybe your commute's a little bit longer, you can put that on there. And it does help. So even if you don't like the aesthetic of it, you can easily take it on and take it off.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. Are we ready? Are we ready for the next one yet?
I think so. So we're now, Johnny the beginner is in the past. Who is our intermediate rider?
Poor Johnny. Intermediate rider is Sarah, who is 34 years old, riding for 8 years, has owned a few bikes, a handful of bikes. And I'm saying she just got an Indian Scout. So this is the 1100cc liquid cooled Indian. Handsome bike,
a nice performance-oriented machine.
Yeah, it's got good solid motor, but classic lines. I think it's a handsome bike in my opinion. And Sarah, as I alluded to before, is interested in is going to ride the bike around town and ride with her friends, but also is thinking about hitting the road. Like maybe going to visit her cousin in Seattle. You never know. Who knows where Sarah lives? But Seattle's a little ways away. Just keep that in mind. And so she knows her way around motorcycling at this point. She's got her feet on the ground, and this is her new bike. And what would we suggest? When should Sarah modify her motorcycle, and if so, how and when?
So the audience now knows who Sarah is. She's our next little personality here. We're going to go guest honors to Patrick, but before we do that, everybody take a minute, think about some recommendations for Sarah, and let's get in a word from our sponsor, Motul. All right, so we're back. We got Sarah as our intermediate rider, Indian Scout, likes riding around town, ready to take some trips. Definitely more experienced and a little bit brighter than Johnny was. Patrick, what do you got for us? What would some of your recommendations, for Sarah and the mods that she'd be considering here?
Well, I think kind of the, maybe no-brainer is luggage and finding an easy way to attach it to the motorcycle, because that can be a little difficult with certain bike models. But something like luggage, going back to your point about the exhaust on your bike, Spurge, is that exhaust may sound cool in the parking lot, 400 or 500 miles in, it's drilling its way into your psyche. And you're not going to be able to shake it. So you trade that exhaust for these bags in a minute when you get down the road. So I think honestly, a good luggage setup it just makes things so much easier. You know what I mean? No matter if you're camping or at a hotel, getting on and off the bike, having the things you need at your fingertips, a good luggage setup is going to make those trips, that much more enjoyable. And then, tires. You don't want to be caught somewhere with needing a tire, or it's raining and the tire's just terrible in the wet. So I mean, my selections would be tires and luggage right off the bat.
Interesting. I wouldn't have. I'm with you on luggage. I don't even think about tires specifically to trips, but I do think that you make a good point in the fact that a good set of tires is going to last you a lot longer versus having to constantly be swapping out tires every 3,000 or 4,000 miles. But
how often? Well, hold on just a second there.
Yeah.
How the stock tires that come on an Indian Scout, for example, they'll last longer than that, right? I don't know how long do just sort of stock tires on a bike like that should people expect them to last? More than 4,000 miles, right?
Well, yes and no. So yes, that's the thing with. I mean, I feel like Michelin kind of started these cruiser tire wars a few years ago, and now people expect cruiser tires to last for an insanely long
25,000 miles on a Commander 3.
I think he's probably be more reasonable, and 10,000 miles out of a tire, probably doable. I can't remember what tire comes on a stock. It comes stock on a Scout.
What I can tell you is that on a stock FTR, I was getting about 2,000 miles out of the FTR rally rear. So,
but those are that's an
entirely different podcast.
That's
episode.
Quite literally a different podcast.
Yeah.
The FTR those are radial and probably a software compound, right? I assume the Scout has
I thought it had a Pirelli on it, like a Night Dragon or something like that. A pretty good tire.
Yeah. Anyway. Okay. Yeah. Well, I didn't want to get too distracted there, but I was surprised. I would assume something like any cruiser tire that comes on a stock American V twin or sort of cruiser would last, double the mileage of a sport tire.
That's kind of the problem. So most of the cruiser tires from even stock, they're meant to last a long time, and they're just perform like a rock. So most of them are just insanely hard, meant to get a bunch of miles, and honestly, the performance that you get out of them is just less than stellar.
Yeah. Okay,
well, so maybe you're about to take the. You're about to take the conversation in a different direction. So go ahead.
I would say maybe as a tire is a consideration. I think that some of the things we talked about for Johnny carry over here as well. So let's assume that Sarah's bike has a windscreen, has a more comfortable seat, because she's already gone through the beginner phase where she's maybe modded her bike out with some of those accoutrements. One of the things that I want to say with Patrick's point is that, like, I agree, a good set of luggage is really going to be key in taking your motorcycling to the next level, especially if you want to go on trips. But I don't think it has to break the bank. And this is something that I talked about. Zach and I did an episode with Ari Henning, I believe it was 2 episodes back now. And one of the things that I really liked when I was starting off was, I just got a set of Core-Tech throw-over bags. And they worked on a Triumph Bonneville, obviously, but they would also work on an Indian Scout. They would work on a Harley Davidson Sportster. They're just, throw-over bags, like $170, I think I paid for the set. And I mean, inflation's crazy now, so maybe that's a $250 bag. But like, I like the fact that there was a duffel bag that went on top that could clip in. You could then strap stuff down and lash stuff to it. So just exploring luggage for a second, like I do like a good set of throw-over, soft saddlebags as a great universal option for a lot of people. Patrick, do you have any specific options that you like? Or Zach, do you have any specific options that you like as far as a luggage recommendation for people?
Yep. You go first, Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, mine is the Kriega US 20s. Now, I wouldn't say that's a cheap bag, but it's really, really modular. And so you can...
Is it a tail bag?
It's kind of an everything bag. So
it's a dry bag. So it looks like a big sack, but
like
they
a
have
roll top dry bag.
Yes,
kind of
like a roll top dry bag. So for those of you listening that don't realize, it's a picture a 20-liter potato sack basically, but it's a lot nicer than that.
Right.
You put it in from the top, and then you roll the top down, so the whole thing is waterproof. And the beauty about Kriega is that the US 20 specifically, and like the 30, is that can be used on pretty much any motorcycle.
Yeah.
It's beautiful in that regard.
Yeah. So how have you used it in the past, Patrick?
I've used them on my Dyna. I rode to Mexico on an FTR with 3 of them. I basically strapped 1 to the tail, and then I strapped 2 to the side of that, basically making saddlebags. So I had a tail bag that strapped down. I strapped the 2 US 20s to the side of it, and then you got 60 liters of storage that's completely waterproof. You can strap stuff to it. Like I said, they're modular. You can strap them to each other. That's just a great system that will fit on pretty much any kind of motorcycle. I haven't found one yet that I haven't been able to use it.
Yeah. I'm surprised you don't have one of those, Zach, because they're very. It's just a great bag to have sitting around in the garage that you can throw on pretty much any bike.
Yeah, I didn't know. I'm a Kriega fan. I have an R20 backpack, and I have some other Kriega products, but I didn't know about the daisy chainable. Roll top sacks. That's pretty
and they
smart.
have them in different sizes too. So you can go like a US 30. I think there's even a 40 now that has like 2 entry points on either side, and you can kind of roll that down. Then there's like smaller 10s and 5s as well. So there's a nice little range of sizes you can go with.
Well, my quick shout out for luggage here is the magnetic tank bag, which I find to be excellent. And an Indian Scout has a steel tank, I'm fairly certain.
They do, yes.
And so yeah, a magnetic tank bag, like you can get them in, I don't know, there'd be a gallon or 2. I don't know how you can get them in a variety of sizes.
2 gallons. That's a big tank bag.
They do have some very large tank bags.
Man.
Anyway, and they're not super expensive, and it's super handy to just have some stuff right in front of you. Like if you pull over, you just have a water bottle, chapstick, spare set of gloves, your phone, whatever in the tank bag. And it's so easy when you get to a restaurant or your hotel or whatever, just grab it and you yank it off your tank, and it doesn't leave anything behind. There's no straps. It's just super, super easy. And I just think a magnetic tank bag is a super underrated piece of luggage.
So I want to agree with you 100%. I think it's important on this podcast to
Mark the
acknowledge.
date.
I think it's important on this podcast to acknowledge that when you and I agree on something, it's a beautiful day. I do want to throw out a warning to Sarah. So, a magnetic tank bag is a beautiful thing. But if you have a little garage where you keep your motorcycle parked, and in that garage you have a little workbench, and on that workbench late at night when you're working on something, you might pop a few beers and you leave a couple beer bottle caps laying around on your workbench, and then you're prepping for a trip and you set your magnetic tank bag down on the workbench.
No, Sarah,
and you
don't do it.
Pick it up and you set it on your motorcycle and you go for a ride, and then you come home and you pick the tank bag off and you realize that there was a beer cap stuck to the bottom of your magnetic tank bag, and it's worn a hole through the finish on the gas tank of your fancy motorcycle. It's a heartbreaking experience. And there is a little metal ring hole on my Triumph Bonneville's gas tank where this happened to me, and it was
so sad.
It was such a stupid mistake, and it wasn't worth the Yinling beer that I had that earned me that.
But now you have
mark.
this great story to tell.
It's true.
It's a warning. It's a warning for other people. A magnetic tank bag is great, but it can pick up all kinds of shavings and little things that might be sitting around in your workshop area.
That is an extremely specific warning, but also but valid, but definitely valid. So moving on. Certainly, Sarah could consider seats as well. I think that's something that I don't know if we talked about.
Well,
that
we talked
already.
about Sarah already has she already has Johnny's windscreen and seat recommendations.
Right.
That we already
So we're
threw
building
out.
on that.
Yep.
Fair enough. Well, yeah. So yeah, some luggage, and we talked about tires. I feel like that's a pretty good summary of like things that she should do. I mean, how much? So let's get back to the practical.
What about like highway pegs? Like I think that like that's something that we hadn't really talked about. I think for the cruiser segment, like if she's going to be taking like longer trips, the Indian Scout specifically has a very hold you in one spot seat design. And I think that basically giving some options, I was actually just having this conversation the other day with a friend who has an old Honda Shadow 600. And he called me. He's like, hey, I've seen people that put like an engine guard on there and then they mount these bars off. I'm looking for a way to stretch out my feet. So I think, for people that are maybe traveling a little bit on the highway or taking a longer trip, I think a highway peg could be a consideration for some folks out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't particularly like highway pegs personally, but that's a good point, Spurge. Have you had much experience with them, Patrick?
I'm in the same boat as you. I'm short-legged, so I don't really like them. But it is a something that I've seen a million cruiser riders. It's very popular in the cruiser community to put those on there.
Right.
Companies like Kiriakin make really adjustable ones that actually will roll forwards and backwards. So it gives you can actually bring them farther, to you or push them away or really get them set up for yourself. I'm not a highway peg guy because I just don't have the legs to, stretch out there. I'm more likely to put them on my rear pegs than a highway peg.
Right.
But I think kind of in that same vein there, handlebars would maybe be another selection there to move, especially if you're really reaching for them on a long road trip. Your back is going to thank you for putting your hands in a different position.
Right.
It's a little bit more of a technical install to swap the bars,
right.
But putting your hands in a different spot can really affect different parts of your body and make you more comfortable in that long haul.
I'm not worried about Sarah. She's pretty savvy. And, she's been around the block.
Not like that idiot Johnny.
Yeah. Oh, my God. Don't even get me started on Johnny.
I trust that Sarah's going to be able to put those handlebars on herself. But what I will say in the same vein is like, don't put beer bottle caps under your magnetic tank bag. If you are going to put a new set of handlebars on your motorcycle, don't do it the morning that you're taking your trip, right?
Ooh,
like put the
advice.
handlebars on, ride the bike around town for a little bit, and make sure that you're comfortable with them because a handlebar is a big change. And I don't think that there's enough credit out here. Like, when we do an episode like this for like dirt bikes, for example, there's hundreds of dirt bike bars out there that have like tiny little tweaks because tiny little tweaks make such a big difference for a lot of riders. So swap your handlebars out, try out different options, but make sure that you don't put a set of handlebars on and then go hit the highway for 8,000 miles.
Yeah. So I got two more things that I want to cover in this topic. One, I gotta, if you're going to hit the road for any amount of time, this is a universal thing that I will, this is a universal hill that I will die on. But Sarah, if you're listening, look into some heated grips. Heated grips are a fantabulous upgrade for any motorcycle if you're going to ride any distance or have
They're
any
a game
temperature
changer.
swing. Oh my God, they're so
100%.
flipping good.
I didn't even.
You're not big on heated grips, Spurge? Get out of here.
Oh man, I never had any experience with heated grips until a couple years ago. I was riding up from Texas back up here to South Dakota. I was in Colorado. I woke up in the morning. It was about 48 degrees, I think, and I was on an F850 GS, and I realized at that point it had heated grips, and I turned them on, and it was like a warm hug. It was
like a warm German hug.
It was. I mean, it just warmed. It was somehow the heated grips warms your entire body. It just pumps heat through your entire body, through your fingertips. I was sold after that. In fact, there's KTM has a heated grip option for my Supermoto, and I'm considering it.
I think a heated grip is a good recommendation. I would save it more for like I don't know if I would recommend it for Sarah. I think
She's
Sarah,
gonna ride all the way to Seattle.
I think Sarah needs to learn
Maybe.
how to ride her motorcycle long distance before having all the cruiser
I
comforts.
see.
Like this
so
might be something.
Spurge Dunbar says you got to learn with some cold hands before you get
Gotta put in
actual
the
heated
time.
grips.
Yeah, snap into a Slim Jim and then ride your damn motorcycle.
How are you going to react when your heated grips break?
Yeah,
You got to have the experience.
you have to have
of
you have to
frozen
know
hands.
what it's like. I mean,
Wow.
get a thicker pair of gloves.
That's
What
true.
about
So-
instead of spending a bunch of money on heated grips, because
They're
Sarah,
not even that expensive. I don't think. I haven't researched it yet.
So
I mean, how much, Patrick? I don't know off the top of my head. Like a set of like Oxford heated grips might run $100.
So hopefully
Should have looked this up.
There's a company called Heat Demons, and they make like a universal kit for cruisers, and basically it's heating elements that you put under your existing grips.
yeah.
They're like thin pieces of metal, and you wire them up, and they got a switch, and
That's-
you can basically make all kinds of grips heated grips.
Yeah, that's what I have. That's what I have on my bike. My dad gave me that years ago for Christmas or my birthday or something like that. And I put them on, and they work pretty well. But they're not quite as good as an
No,
actual
definitely
dedicated
not.
set of grips.
And-
So, but like with cruisers, a lot of times the grips are kind of thick and burly. So
Yeah.
But it still works to put the sort of like under whatever there's like
Still
heated-
works.
heating
Like,
elements under. Yeah.
To your point, it's not as good as like a factory set of
Right.
heated grips on a touring bike or a BMW or something like. But it does the job. It's better than not having heated grips.
I looked it up. You can get a set of Oxford heated grips for about $115 up to about $200. So
That's
like
not bad.
not crazy. I might have exaggerated a little bit there, but my point is that what I think might be a better option for Sarah / all you intermediate riders out there would be some kind of a throttle lock. Especially speaking from experience, if you're taking a long trip, you're cruising across Nebraska and you're trying to burn down miles, having something where you can give your right hand a bit of a break, I would say is probably something that I would value a little bit more than I would heated grips.
Not bad advice at all. So one other thing I wanted to mention, or put a question to you guys. What amount of time would you suggest Sarah ride her new motorcycle before she make any of these changes?
Good question.
Yeah, I think it's the word time is the key thing there, because like a couple of you may do it for if you makes like a handlebar change and rides back and forth to work for a week, but her commute is only 15 minutes. That's probably not going to tell the tale, as opposed to going out on a Saturday and riding for a solid hour. And that's when the cumulative effect of that change is going to take
Right.
you're really going to feel it. So I think do a long session or a longest session, easy for me to say, do an hour on the bike. Try not to get off the bike, run a tank of gas out of it, and you're going to feel the parts that you don't like.
Especially if you have a goal of logging miles in the future. Yeah,
Yep.
that's good advice. I like that.
Well,
Spurge?
I think the other part here is to remember that Sarah's got a couple years of riding under her belt on a variety of motorcycles. This isn't Sarah's first motorcycle.
True.
She's been through a couple different avenues on this, and I think it's important for us to remember we were just starting off. Like when I was a younger rider and I had just bought the Bonneville. I spent quite a bit of time on it before I started making, mistakes. And I was like, oh, a more comfortable seat would have been a real benefit there. Oh, like my neck is sore. I need a windscreen. Whereas now, if I was planning a trip and you gave me a brand new motorcycle, I would probably be able to figure it out a lot quicker as to like what I need.
Right.
I would say
Right.
thinking about Sarah's situation, I would recommend that Sarah ride the bike for a few months before she really makes any go-to decisions. I think that it is important, even for me now, if I get a new bike, I try to ride it in its stock form for at least a couple of months before I figure out what modifications I want to do to it. So I would say give 30 to 60 days of riding and then kind of figure out which of these modifications are really something that you need to throw on there.
Yeah.
What about you,
especially if
Zach?
you're not-
Do you have any differing opinions, Zachary?
No, that's what I was going to say. I mean, that's what I was reaching for, was that sort of piece of advice, is to even if you think you are, oh, I'm just going to get this bike and I'm going to slap those pipes on it and I'm going to slap that handlebar on it and I'm going to slap that thing on too, and then I'm going to have the bike that I want. Just remember that that some you're allowed to change your mind, and making taking some time to make an assessment is, I think, the right thing to do. So that's all I was reaching for there.
I think the right to change your mind is key, right? Just because you make a modification does not mean that you have to leave that modification on there. I think sometimes motorcyclists get sensitive because like they'll spend $200 on something and they'll be like, oh, well, I spent this money on it. I got to leave it on the bike and I got to learn to love it. You don't. Like that's what eBay is for, right? Like I can't tell you how many times. Like my and I don't want to go down the ADV road because this is that's another podcast. But like my most recent 890. I've actually pulling parts off that I bought it used, and then there's so much stuff on it that I didn't want, and I'm pulling stuff off of it. I'm just putting it up on eBay and I'm selling it because it's like you don't have to live with this if it's not something that's right for you. So don't be afraid to go back. And I think at this point we can move on to our final, more advanced modification section. But what I do want to say is that you've already used heated grips once, Zach. So you don't get to just keep throwing heated grips on every motorcycle that we modify for the rest of the day.
Do.
No,
and I will. And
we've already talked about heated grips.
Heated grips.
Before
always.
we make a heated grips podcast, I'm just stopping you in advance because I know where this is headed. You're going to make heated grip recommendations for every other rider on this list.
Hey everybody, welcome to season 7, episode 2 of Heated Grips. I'm your host, Zach Quartz. Just a reminder, get heated grips. I'm glad I have an advocate in young Patrick here telling me.
You can pair that with a heated seat, you know.
That's true.
Now you're getting up into the next rider. So, Zach, who is our next rider?
Well, our next rider, I kind of wanted to hopefully have a little bit of fun with this pivot here. We talked about how much time Sarah should spend on the bike before she makes some of these modifications. Our expert rider is Patrick. He lives in Sturgis, South Dakota. He is a very experienced motorcycle. He even works in the industry.
Did you see this coming, Patrick? Did you see this coming?
Didn't see this coming, but I can kind of see where it's going.
He is extremely handsome. He is a Capricorn. I actually don't know when your birthday is.
I am a Capricorn.
Are you? Wow, how about that? Anyway, I kind of wanted to put this, just obviously make this sort of a personal question for you to answer, Patrick. How long, you're obviously an expert motorcyclist and mechanic, and so how long would you wait to make modifications to bikes that you buy?
It's an interesting question because generally speaking, like if I would buy a cruiser, I bought the bike planning on making a host of modifications, and I'm going to make a lot. Right. Whereas like I just bought my first new motorcycle 2 years ago.
What was it?
Husky Svartpillen 701.
Who makes Husky?
I believe
what brand?
I believe that's
Husky?
an orange company. KTM.
That's the same company that makes your underwear, Spurgeon.
Yeah.
Patrick wasn't on for this. Patrick,
that's right. He literally.
No.
I got KTM underpants. Chase got me KTM underpants for my birthday. Boxer briefs.
That's amazing. The orange adds 5 horsepower.
He also got me a size XL that I don't need. So I don't know what size underwear you wear, Patrick, but if you're an XL, I got a Capricorn gift coming for you.
Oh, dear.
And I didn't modify that Husky at all. And I traded it in on a KTM, as it were. And I have yet to modify that. I rode it for a year without modifying it. So it was because I'm so familiar with some of the Harleys and cruisers that I know what I'm going to do, and I've had the experience of making the modifications. Whereas the 690 that I have now, I am going to modify that this year. But I took time to get familiar with the bike, to Spurgeon's point from earlier, and decide what I wanted to do to the motorcycle. But specifically to cruisers, I'm going to kind of change everything. Suspension, I'm going to do motor work, handlebars, controls. I have the experience to know what I want changed and exactly, what to do to fit my riding style. I will do a little bit of a mini rant here. This is, I think, kind of specific to the cruiser industry. Uh-huh. I mean, really, don't do modifications solely based on aesthetics. And that is a lot of the cruiser industry, and that's a lot of, social media. The things look cool. I get it. They do look cool. But that doesn't necessarily translate to the best version of you and your motorcycle. So take the time to make decisions for yourself, not necessarily based around a certain style that is being that is popular on Instagram. I mean, do what you want to do. Get that bike set up for you, because everybody's different and they're going to react differently to changes on motorcycles.
Right?
So I want to focus for a second, because we've already, so going back through Johnny the failure, Sarah the awesome rider, and then now you, Patrick, the shining star example that everyone should model their life after.
Good
So
luck,
we talked about a little bit about we talked a little bit about suspension already. We talked a little bit about comfort and winch screens and seats and all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned you would start off the top of your head. You know that there's engine performance modifications you'd make. So let's spend a little bit of time unpacking that. So
Yeah.
when I'm thinking about, I come home with a brand new V-twin cruiser. What are some of the engine modifications that you particularly would want to make to that right off the bat?
Cams and a big bore, and I say that because I already know I'm changing the exhaust and intake too. And if it's fuel injected bike, I'm putting a tuner on it. The air cooled bikes, especially out of the box now from the factory, are fairly lean, and that creates a lot of heat. So you see like the little wings being put on underneath seats to keep your thighs from cooking, things like that. That is all because the bike's in a bad state of tune, kind of already. So when you start adding displacement, compression to the bike, it's going to make it hotter, run hotter. It needs some fuel thrown at it to cool it off, not just make it run better. But I mean, big bore and cams, intake, exhaust, tuner, those are going to happen to, well, quite frankly, every single Harley that I'll ever own.
So let's pause for 1 second here, because I think there's a lot of people that listen to this podcast that are probably a little bit more on the beginner side of things, and you obviously are our shining, handsome example of an enthusiast that's been around the block before. Let's just break down cams and big bore.
Sure.
What do you mean by cams, and then what do you mean by big bore, just on a rudimentary level, so that everybody understands what we're talking about?
So with a cam, that's going to affect how much the valve is open and how long it stays open. And why that's important is that's going to move more air through the engine. And the more air you move through an engine, the more fuel you can add to that, and it creates a bigger explosion inside the engine, which equates to more horsepower. Now, that's the same thing with a big bore. We're adding displacement. We're putting a bigger piston inside that cylinder, so it adds a greater volume inside the motor. So again, you can pull more air into that motor, you can add more fuel, bigger explosion, and those, the cams and the big bore work hand in hand to move more air through there. Now, you can do just one or the other, but they're doing the same thing. They're creating a bigger volume inside the engine to make a bigger bang to make more horsepower.
The other thing to note with cams too, and this is something that I think a lot of people make the mistake on, and I'm sure that you could speak to this as well, but I think a lot of people think, and it's very specific to the cruiser market, because very few people are going out and buying like a ZX10 and throwing a set of cams in. Not that you wouldn't, Patrick, because I know a little of your history. But I think it is something that's a little bit more specific in the everyday world of the cruiser segment. But I think a lot of people think, well, I just want a high performance cam. And what they don't realize is that typically gives you more horsepower, but it gives you more horsepower at the top end of the rev range versus people that might want more torque or more mid-range. And I do think it's important to note, especially for beginners out there, is that you really have to think about the kind of riding you like doing and the kind of performance you're really looking for. If you're only looking for top-end horsepower, that typically comes with a sacrifice of a little bit of that low-end grunt that a lot of cruiser riders really enjoy. And if you're maximizing all of that low-end grunt, that's going to come, at the sacrifice of some of that top-end horsepower. So I do think there's a relationship there
100%.
that is important for people to understand.
Yeah, it really is. And I think, I consider myself, a hot rod guy. I think a lot of us, that we think we really, get on these motorcycles, when the reality is you spend most of your throttle position life in 35, 40% maybe. So picking a cam that is a streetable cam that moves your usable horsepower back to the bottom and middle RPM range is really going to feel faster. It's going to feel quicker to you than, like a big high lift cam that's basically made for the racetrack. It's important to kind of read those cam specs, read those, descriptions of the cams. We have videos. We've made a bunch of cam videos on how to choose cams, gear drive versus chain drive, and cam installations. I mean, it seems like, and it is, you need to have a little bit of experience before you go pulling cams out of your motorcycle. It's not a beginner job. But I would say, and specifically to the cruiser industry here, you can do it, in your garage if you have some mechanical aptitude and the right tools. I was talking to the producer Chase earlier, and like I have no formal mechanic training. Like I grew up, I really didn't even work on my own car. When I graduated high school, I started taking things apart and putting them back together. And I learned.
But you were also driving a Ferrari in high school, using the family construction money to buy your hot rod Italian sports cars that you just couldn't even work on. You know, you had your own personal mechanic.
Between that and my Maserati, whatever. But I mean, I think the distinction between cruiser and non-cruiser is important because we're talking about, you know, specifically with Harley, it's a tractor motor, so it's a lot easier to work on than popping the top off of a Hayabusa or something and, you know, dealing with valve shims and all that type of stuff. So it does lean itself more to being able to swap that cam.
Right. Yeah, that's fair enough. So you touched a little bit on kind of I don't know. You went on that little rant to sort of you touched a little bit on kind of like underrated mods, I guess. You talked about what you would do.
Yeah.
What's aside from aesthetics, I guess, what's something that you feel like you see people do it's like a common upgrade maybe or a common thing that people put their money into and you just think like that's where you're wasting your time. Why you're like you're wasting your money, you're wasting your time. Why would you do that?
Two of them jump to mind really quickly. In exhaust, choosing the wrong exhaust. I mean, we've touched on that, but it does happen. I mean, just choosing. I mean, aesthetics is a big reason why you choose an exhaust, but it can also be a bad decision because you know really short like pipes with no baffle in them. Like one of the questions that you get all the time in the cruiser industry is like, how do I take the baffle out? My answer is don't. Like Vance and Hines S&S, they spend a lot of time in R&D actually tuning those baffles for your motorcycle, and you're just chucking that out the window and turning it into like a metal tube. So, like I see a lot of mistakes being made with exhaust choices.
Okay.
And the second one would be like we kind of touched on earlier is handlebars. Choosing an aesthetic in your handlebar, you know, your comfort may take a back seat.
I want to say too, just so we can clarify for all the listeners out there, removing a baffle, as Patrick is describing here, is an insert that actually it's an insert that goes into the end of your exhaust. And a lot of people think that a baffle is just there to regulate sound. But a baffle also plays into the back pressure of the engine, and that's where, Patrick, I believe that you're talking about from a performance standpoint. You actually can sacrifice performance by making your engine louder, correct?
You probably are going to. There's a high likelihood.
I remember a few years ago now, Ari and I, our coworker at Motorcyclist Magazine, Aaron Frank, he had a long-term test bike of the then new R1200 GS adventure bike when it had just gone to like a liquid cooled or water cooled engine, and you know, anyway, he got an exhaust for it. I want to say it was like a Remus exhaust. I don't want to throw Remus under the bus, but I think it was a Remus exhaust. And he put the pipe, I don't remember if it was a slip-on. I think it might have been a slip-on. He put on the GS, and then he did dyno runs back to back on a dyno to measure actual rear wheel horsepower. And I think the Remus exhaust was a few pounds lighter than the factory GS exhaust, but I think it ended up making like the same amount of horsepower or two less horsepower and a little bit less torque than the stock exhaust. And he had this whole update where he sort of talked about like, you know, BMW's not the days of just taking the pipe off your Gixxer and putting on a slip-on and getting 10 horsepower are over. BMW spent 100%. A lot of time engineering that exhaust, and they did it right. they built one that worked well.
It also goes back to where you want your power too, because I had an Aero exhaust on my Tiger 800, and I pulled the baffle out because exactly what Patrick's talking about here. I wanted to make it louder. Pulled the baffle out, went for one ride, and was like, "Nope, baffle's going back in," because there was no low end performance all of a sudden. It just didn't want to do anything below 6,000 RPM, and I was like, "Nope, baffle's going back in." It made that much of a noticeable difference, not taking it to a dyno or anything else. So I do think that's a great point, Patrick. Is that like you can still have a great sounding motorcycle that also performs well if you're willing to do it correctly.
Right. Yeah. Well, wait, I don't want to cut you off, Patrick. I was gonna pivot a little bit. You got anything else you want to say on that topic?
No, I was just going to say, you're on the right track with the late model bikes and exhaust. I
Right.
mean, horsepower for dollar, there's not a lot there anymore. Like you said, years back, even with Harleys, you swap the exhaust out, you're gaining 10, 12, 15 horsepower. That's not really the case these days. I look at it as more a package deal. If you're going to put the cams in there, if you're going to take the next steps,
Right.
those are accompanying things that will then, have value for you and benefit. But if you got a stock motor, just swapping out an exhaust almost on any bike these days, it's just your horsepower for dollar. It's not a good investment.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's a very good summary of all that. I appreciate that perspective so much. I guess what I'd like to do, I'm not sure if this is the right time to do it, but what I'd like to do is we talked about some specific bikes. We talked about Johnny with his 883 iron. We talked about Sarah with the Indian Scout. We don't spend a ton of time typically on high side, low side talking about the cruiser segment. And I guess I was kind of thinking we should do. It can be in the vein of modifications, but I was thinking we could do like a little lightning round of metric cruiser options and sort of like what those bikes are good for and how you might want to modify them as well. Just a few sort of recommendations or bikes that come to mind in the metric cruiser world. Does that sound like a plan?
Yeah.
So I want to tie on the one thing that I just want to kind of to drive home before we leave the advanced rider behind.
Yeah.
Is that, and this kind of ties into the transition that I was talking about between Sarah and Patrick, was specifically like my Triumph Bonneville, right? Like I did the beginner rider / intermediate rider thing where I put the shocks on, and then after a couple of years, I was like, I want more out of my shocks.
Mm-hmm.
I want more performance out of my shocks. And so I got rid of the cheaper set of Öhlins and I added a more advanced set of Öhlins. And I think that's one of those things to keep in mind too when you're modifying a motorcycle, especially for a motorcycle that you keep for a while. I think sometimes we talk about this in like very finite terms of like, oh, you modify the motorcycle and then you're done.
True,
but I think for a lot of people, if you keep a motorcycle for multiple years, your modifications change. And I think it's just important to note that like, let the bike change with you. As your riding style changes, as you go from Johnny to Sarah to Patrick, don't be afraid to pull off some of the mods you made early on and swap it out and let the bike move with you. That's one of the beautiful things about motorcycles and modding them out is that you can make a bike do so many different things. And with cruisers or standards, and again I think I'm speaking a little bit more specifically to like a standard style of motorcycle, there's really no end in sight to what you can do with it. And I think Patrick's a shining example of like, I've seen him take a Harley Davidson Sportster off-road. Like there's different aspects of what you can do with a cruiser that you don't have to be limited as your modifications progress. And with that, now, let's move on to some. I like the idea of getting into some of the metric stuff.
Yeah, so the first bike I was going to bring up is the Kawasaki Vulcan S, which is a cruiser that uses the same engine essentially as the Ninja 650 and Versus 650. It's a little 180-degree crank parallel twin. And on the topic of modifications, an interesting thing that Kawasaki did with the Vulcan when it was launched was make it very modular with handlebars and foot position. And so from the factory, you can shift stuff around. It's very that was sort of one of the things that Kawasaki pushed really hard. And I think that really speaks to arguably more of like a Johnny style character, right? Someone who's getting into bikes. I think that would be a good bike. I think it's a good bike, period. And a good place to start for that reason, because there are so many factory options for changing the ergonomics and changing the way you fit on the bike. And Kawasaki thought of that ahead of time, that it makes it a good place to start for modifications in some way, because it's already built to change and fit whatever size or type of rider you are, which I think is cool.
I think that's a great bike. I think the engine in that bike is awesome too. And then there's also...
Do you really?
I love that engine.
Oh, interesting.
You don't like it?
I do not. No.
Really?
The Ninja 650 versus 650 Vulcan S engine is sort of like I don't know. It's practically it's quite good. Like I think it works fine. I just find it so uninspiring from I just don't like the way it sounds. I don't particularly like the way it feels. I just like it's a little buzzy, but I don't know. I just don't really, even though I like those bikes in general.
I like that engine. I think that's a fun engine. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure there's big bore kits available for those.
Oh yeah.
Oh, there's the advanced modification we're looking for out of you.
Yeah. So the American Flat Track Twins.
Oh,
class,
that's right. Yeah,
they use those. They use those engines as the Kawasaki platform, which has been a very good platform, and they make them 750s, and there's stuff available to them to make them hot rods.
So so those consumer parts that you can buy?
Yes, you can
Really?
do that. Yep.
Wow, so you could make a hot rod versus 650. Oh boy.
Or a hot rod Vulcan S.
Or a hot rod Vulcan S, but I mean, a hot rod Vulcan, hot rod versus 650 really, that makes me a little.
Is the Battletoad, is that?
That's a versus
right.
650, yep.
The Battletoad is a versus 650, so we can make a hot rod Battletoad.
Big bore Battletoad.
Big bore Battletoad. You heard it here first. Yeah, all right.
So I like the call out to Kawasaki. I think the Vulcan S doesn't get as much recognition as it should because it is definitely not the traditional cruiser, right? It's a parallel twin, not a V twin. It's got a slightly different aesthetic to it. You do have the Ergo Fit system that Kawasaki has for that bike.
Right.
The other one that I want to shout out is, and I know it's maybe if you're looking at the website in 2022, there's not as many options, but historically speaking, Honda's Shadow line has been really unique. Not that you can buy the bike and necessarily have all the different ergos change like the Kawasaki, but what I liked about the Honda Shadow line was, excuse me, was that like there were so many different versions of it. You could get a Shadow Phantom. You could get a Shadow RS. You could get a Shadow... help me out here, guys. What were the other ones that they had? There's an Arrow. They had all these different versions of the Honda Shadow, so you could really kind of fine-tune what you were looking for. It was a nice middleweight bike. I think it was great for, newer riders transitioning into a middleweight, and yet it was enough power there that still you could take a trip on, and you could satiate someone like Sarah, who was maybe already advanced a little bit, but still wanted something that she could kind of take a trip on. So I think there were a lot of great options within the Honda Shadow line that sometimes get overlooked.
Yeah, I mean, and that it goes back forever. I mean, there's so many options used kicking around, but it's a good point. I mean, a brand new Shadow Phantom is arguably a not a bad looking bike, and it's a 750cc V twin, and it's $7,500. It's like sort of, you forget how reasonable they are.
I think the VTXs in the Honda line, like those were great cruisers that honestly had a lot of customization available to them. Matter of fact, I built a custom VTX for a JMP display bike way back in the day.
VTX 1300 or VTX 1800?
I liked the 1800. They killed that off before the 1300. And then I think didn't they use a version of one of those motors in the Fury, which, I mean, of all the companies to build a factory chopper, I wouldn't have ever expected Honda to be that. But kind of that's only like factory chopper that I think that's ever really been built, right? Is the Fury.
And they've been building it forever.
Yeah.
I mean, how long's it been around?
I just pulled it up. It's still on their website now.
It is.
The
2022. It comes in yellow.
It's not a bad looking motorcycle. Like it's not really for that chopper style.
No, it's kind of, it's like it reminds me of like the motorcycle that was in Grand Theft Auto, Like, it's just sort of like a generic cruiser chopper things that you clock the guy in the head. You're like, I'm stealing your motorcycle. And he's like, some dude in a leather vest. And it's just like this very kind of like, you couldn't really tell what it was, but it was clearly a chopper.
It was clearly a Honda Fury.
Yeah. It was too finished. Yeah.
What's interesting is, so when I was working at the dealership level at Castle Power Sports down in Nashville, I had the opportunity where my boss would let me ride a lot of the used bikes. And on the weekends, I could pick which one I wanted to take out and go ride. And there was one point in time where he was like, hey, I want you to take this Honda Fury home. And I was like, I don't want to do that. Why?
Oh, yes, you
And he's
do.
like, we need to put some miles on it. We need to test it out. We did a repair on it. We need you to just go ride it for the day. And I was like, and I really enjoyed it. Like, I honestly, it handled so much better than I thought it was going to. It rode great. It was really a cool bike. So for all you Honda Fury riders out there, it is an impressive machine.
I mean, Honda's really like in the cruiser market. I mean, the Ruin. Come on. Like
we talked about that in which episode did we talk about that on?
I think ugliest motorcycles of all time is when we talked about the Honda Ruin.
I talked about it.
How dare you?
Yeah, I said it was a good-looking motorcycle. You felt it was not. I thought it was. Yes.
Did you really?
Yeah, I like the Honda Ruin.
So do I. Yeah.
Because we talked about Patrick. Do you remember like the advertisements for it, where it was like the Norse god like standing there shirtless? Yeah.
So we had a rep from Cobra. I can't remember Randy's last name. Shout out to Randy. He used to ride to the JMP events. He was based in Tennessee, and he had a Honda Ruin, and he rode that thing all over the country, doing his rep job. Yeah, Honda Ruin.
Yeah, respect.
I think we're overlooking what, in my opinion, maybe the best line of Japanese cruiser motorcycles.
Just so we're clear, Patrick is saying Honda Rune, not Honda Ruin. Because ruin makes it sound like it's just it's ruined. It's a piece of crap. And it's not. It's a rune.
Like Dune, but a
Yeah,
motorcycle.
like Dune.
Dune, but Rune. Yeah. So you were saying the underrated line, Patrick.
Yamaha, the Star Series.
Okay.
The V-Stars were really good. So I'm going to date myself way back in my drag racing days. Pro Star, which then moved into like AMA something. Anyways, they had a cruiser class that was really meant for Harleys, but it turned out those Star motorcycles ended up dominating that class. So there's modifications available for them, and man, I can't remember who was doing those two bikes. There was a speed shop that was doing that. But anyways, they had some like Honda Star cruisers that were running like 930s.
Yamaha, that is.
Yeah, Yamahas. Yep. And so they used that in the Warrior, and what was the other one? They had like a touring version, kind of a Road King looking one.
Was this Stratoliner part of that one?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of. The Stratoliner,
The Stratoliner was a pretty bike. That was a pretty motorcycle.
Road King looking kind of bike. Yeah, very nice.
Well, and if we're talking about Yamaha and cruisers, we should probably talk about the iconic V Max. No, I mean. That's another kind of a cool bike. I don't know, like it's a little silly, it's a little heavy.
A power cruiser? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, it's a muscle cruiser basically. And it is, I don't know. Every time I ride one, I think I'm stuck between I can't believe they sell these to people, and this is kind of fun. And
it's an insane motorcycle.
Yeah, it is.
My first time ever lane splitting was on a VMAX in California.
Nice.
So, and I never rode version 1 years ago. I rode the late model one.
Same, yeah.
It's insanity. It really is.
It's a 1700 cc V4, I think, and it makes just a gobsmacking amount of power, and it's heavy.
It's not light. Yeah.
No, it's a big heavy bike, but man, it will just stretch space and time. It's phenomenally fast and phenomenally
I don't want to go too far down the historical rabbit hole, but like the Honda Magna too. You mentioned a V4. Like the Honda Magna was a cool bike. That was a V4 in the 90s.
Right. Okay.
I want to stick a little bit more to like modern bikes, but the Moto Guzzi California. Do you remember that bike?
Yep.
That was
the old one.
It was like 2000 and 2015,
I think they
2013.
They kind of like revived it. Yeah. I think I know what you mean.
One of the new. Well, I'm talking because I'm trying to keep it new. Like if I was going to go, I'd probably go with like an old Moto Guzzi Eldorado from like the 60s or 70s would be more my cup of tea. But no, from like speaking new, I think Moto Guzzi's been doing a lot to try to get into that segment a little bit. They have their V7. As far as like a standard, style motorcycle, I think is a really cool option.
And then there's the V9. There's the bobber and the
that bagger.
V9 bobber. And,
what's the name of the bagger with the red cylinder tops?
MGX21.
It looks like Batman's bike.
Right. The Flying Fortress.
Yes. Yeah, I'm a fan.
You're a fan? Have you ever ridden one?
No.
Okay. Yeah, they do look wicked. The handling is it does the
Is it rough?
Well, the front end has that weird feel when you turn in, and it kind of the front end going at low speed. It's like it wants to fall. The front wheel wants to fall over because it's kind of like it's fairly raked out, and the front wheel is kind of big. And I wasn't super impressed with low speed handling. But hey, that's not the point of
no.
That bike,
but
so.
what I like better. So as far as that Moto Guzzi, that particular, what did you say, Zach? It was MX21.
MGX21.
MGX21. So the one that I like better than that, but in the same vein, is the BMW K1600B. Ooh. That I thought was a really impressive machine.
Oh my God!
Every time somebody brings up bagger racing, like in a
how often does that come up in conversation?
I mean, it's specifically to Common Tread. If it's ever a bagger racing article, it's like, what about because everybody knows if you put one of those out of there, it would be the end of that competition.
Yeah. Oh my God! Yeah, that engine is so ridiculous. So it's an inline 6 for those of you who don't know, and it is buttery smooth, and it makes a bizarre demon shriek when you spin it up to whatever it is, whatever red line is, like $9,000 or something like that. I forget, for a 1600 cc engine. It is a wild machine. And and yeah, darn comfortable. But yeah, that's a wicked bike too.
Yeah, and it's got no shortage of modifications already made to it. It's got pretty much every bell and whistle, already thrown at it in a lot of ways. I want to kind of, I don't want to say wrap this up if you have other recommendations, but I spent a lot of time talking about, throughout this whole episode, kind of like standard motorcycles. And the example that I was using from a personal perspective was the Triumph, T100 that's in my garage. Mm-hmm. But there was also an era where Triumph had an America and a Speedmaster. And some of those bikes still exist to this day in different forms.
Right.
But when I was talking about like the Honda Shadows, I think as far as bang for the buck bargain, the 865 engines or the 790 into the 865 engine era, air-cooled Triumph, Speedmaster, and Americas, they didn't sell well in the beginning, so you can find them for relatively affordable. They're bulletproof reliable. Mm-hmm. There's a ton of different modifications you can make to them to get them to however you want to be. And it's a fun, reliable cruiser for people out there that might not want a Triumph Bonneville standard. They want something that's a little bit more cruiser-esque in style. It's an excellent option to consider for those of you out there.
Yeah, they've made the Speedmaster for a long time. I remember riding they had a Thunderbird way back when too, which I think was
that was bigger. Yeah,
that was bigger. That was like a 1200 or a 1600.
Well, they went up to 1600. There were a couple different versions of it, and they said that they couldn't. Yeah, because there was a special version that bumped up to a 1600, and for the longest time, they were. There was all this stuff out there. You can't make a parallel twin that big. The vibration will kill you to death, or kill you to death.
Kill you to death.
Let's just rewind on that one. But it was. I think at the time it came out, it was the largest production P twin ever made. And it was like dual counterbalancers to make everything work. But big bike.
It was great. I did a test with a sister magazine back in the day. And I don't remember what the other bikes were, but I think there was a Harley and there was an Indian, and then there was that Thunderbird, and then something else, metric, some other Japanese cruiser or something like that. And the Thunderbird was my pick, man. It was a treat. It was just like handled well. It was handsome to look at, and the power was great. I don't know. I just thought it was good. Yeah. I totally forgot about that bike until we're having this conversation. But we just did turn into sort of a buyer's guide chin wag here that we're just sort of like spitting out.
No, but I think it's important to note, because I think oftentimes when we do talk about cruisers, people just assume we're talking about either Harley Davidson or Indian. But right. I like the fact that you do that pivot. And for those of you listening, we had no idea that Zach was going to pivot the conversation at the end there. That was something he came up with on his own. He deserves all the credit. But I would say that I think it was a great little, anecdote, to jump around the horn like that at the end, because outside of Harley Davidson and outside of Indian, there are a lot of really great cruiser motorcycles out there. There's a lot of great standard motorcycles out there that can serve that itch, or serve that need for a lot of people.
Right. True enough. Well, any I don't know. I think we're just about ready to send you on your merry way, Patrick. Any final words of wisdom for those people who might be interested in modifying their cruisers? You've dropped so much wisdom. If you don't have any left, it's okay. I just figured I'd give you a last word.
I do. I bang this drum all the time, and I just want to say that have confidence in yourself. You can do it. You can make the modifications.
Nice.
On the motorcycle. I mean, like a large portion of my life in the motorcycle industry has been making how-to videos and showing people how to do that, and I really believe in it. And that's how I started. Anybody can do it. Get yourself the right set of tools. Give yourself the time to do it, and then we have a lot of videos out there to help you. And I think people need to have that belief in themselves that they can do that work. I mean, I'm the example, because I am not a genius by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just a grease monkey with some time on his hands, and I've managed to modify a lot of motorcycles. And so, take the time, believe in yourself. You can knock it out.
Right. Yeah, that's great. And a quick plug for JMP Cycles also. A lot of the work that you've done and information you provided is on the JMP Cycles YouTube channel. Is that correct? And the website as well. Yeah. Yeah, so that's great.
And Patrick also has a whole new series coming out. So by the time this video goes out, you're doing a whole series on the M8, right? So you're going to walk through how to modify an entire M8 Harley Davidson.
What's an M8 version?
That's a question for Patrick.
So in 2017, Harley came out with their new power plant in the baggers, the M8. They adopted it to the rest of their big twins in 2018. All the Softail models have M8 motors in them. And so we are going stem to stern. There will not be a stone left unturned. We disassembled the entire motor. We're going crankshaft, big bore, cams, cylinder head, fuel system, and we are actually building a 131-inch motor. We should effectively more than double the horsepower of the engine. But in doing so, we're going to break that down into bite-sized chunks, and anything you want to know how to do to an M8, we'll have you covered. All the nuts and bolts, all the tools, you can get it done.
Man,
There you go.
There you
So
go.
it ties in
Get out of
perfectly
here,
with
man.
this
You're going to
episode.
blow up the
Yeah.
internet. This is
Man,
too
oh,
much
man.
good information.
Thank you
Hey,
for
thanks for
joining
having
us
us.
today, Patrick, and thanks for taking the time.
I really appreciate it, guys.
Talk soon, man. All right, ladies and jelly spoons, there you have it. Patrick Garvin and his inimitable knowledge of modifications, especially to cruisers. We didn't even get into his sport bike background, which would be super fun to do.
It's another episode.
That's another episode. It's all about podcasts.
He's put cams in a lot of different things. Let's just leave it at that.
Let's just say. So now we move on to high side, low side comments, which is one of my favorite parts of the show here, where we answer some questions and thoughts, comments, concerns that you, our viewers and listeners, have provided. First one here is from Sam. Came in via email. That's electronic email for those of you still using the other kind.
High side, low side at RevZilla.com for those of you who are wondering where to email your comments to.
Correct. Sam says, I'm a new rider who started on a 2012 Ninja 250. Nice. I'm looking to upgrade to something more powerful. More powerful than Ninja 250. Okay, well, I suppose.
I like where he's
getting
going
a
with
little
this.
greedy, Sam.
Yeah.
But I'm having the same issue as I did when I first started bike shopping. I can't try any of them. I recently did a Yamaha demo day, but unfortunately there are very few demo days I can find near me in Dallas, Texas. And most dealers don't do test rides. So the question is, how do I try out bikes so I know what I'm looking for? Would you guys recommend using a bike rental service, joining some sort of club, trying a stranger's bike, waiting for demo days? Should I steal one? I'm just kidding. Sam didn't say that. Yeah. So just to be clear, Sam did not suggest stealing a motorcycle, nor did High Side, Low Side, or RevZilla, or any of its parent companies or affiliates.
Yeah, it was Zach. So if you have any complaints about that, send them right to Zach Cords at...
Anyway, this is a good question. How do you try bikes when dealers won't let you ride them and demo days aren't easily available? Spurgeon Dunbar, what should he do? He or she?
I would say he or she should recognize that, first of all, not all dealerships are equal. And this is something that we've talked about a bit on Common Tread. There is a weird little conundrum in the world of motorcycling where, a lot of dealerships aren't willing to provide test rides. And, it's something that complicates the purchasing process for a lot of people. However, there's a lot of dealerships out there that will provide test rides, especially on used bikes, or they typically have like one of each model set aside to allow you for test rides. Certain brands are better about it. Like Triumph, for example, for a long time, I don't know if they still do, but when I was working at the dealership level, if somebody came in and asked for a test ride on a Triumph, you had to allow them to take a test ride. Like that was part of what Triumph was trying to instill.
Really?
In
Interesting.
in the way that their dealership experience works.
okay.
So Sam, not all dealerships are equal. Not all brands are equal. And I would just encourage you to call around to a couple dealerships, talk to them about your experience, let them know that you have experience riding at this point. And honestly, a lot of this is going to be based on the kind of bike you're trying to ride. If you're saying, hey, I'd like to take an MT-07 out for a ride, or I'd like to take a CB650R out for a ride as like the next middleweight up in my progressive step here, that's going to make a lot more sense to a dealer than if you come in and say, hey, I want to take a Hayabusa for a test ride, right? Like, and I don't want to keep throwing Hayabusa owners under the bus, but like, it's not exactly the next step up in your progression. So for one piece of advice there would be call around to a couple of different dealerships, see if there's some dealers that are willing to work with you and willing to let you take it for a ride. The other part of this is, and I had not really thought of this before, but I like where you're going, Sam, if there are rental services available to you, I think renting a bike is a great way to get, because if you go to take a test ride, you're going to maybe get 3 or 4 miles on the bike. It's not going to give you much to really kind of sink your teeth into. And honestly, there's been plenty of times where I've ridden a motorcycle for a day and been like, I didn't really like it. And then an opportunity will come up to ride the same motorcycle for a couple days. And by the end of a couple days, I'm like, this is a pretty cool little motorcycle. So I really like the idea of the rental thing.
That's definitely smart. Yeah. And there's insurance built in there, and we're assuming, Sam, that you're not a wildly reckless person or rider, so you should be fine. It shouldn't be a problem. But that's a good way to cover yourself and a good way to try different bikes.
Zach,
And
what are some, because I think for our audience speaking, we're not talking necessarily even about like Eagle Rider, but like there's a lot of different ride share rental programs out there right now.
Yeah, so
correct?
this is the sort of like blend, Sam, you asked, should I try Stranger's Bike? Should I join some sort of club? Should I try and rent a bike? And it's sort of all those things. Something like Twisted Road, right? That's the one that's popping to mind right now. But Twisted Road is, it's a ride sharing app. So it's like Turo is for cars, except it's for motorcycles. So you go on there and say, hey, I want to rent this bike, and it'll be like, this is Steve and his Royal Enfield Continental GT, and you can take it for, however many dollars a day. And I think that's a great idea. And you're in a big metro area, so there's probably going to be a fair number of things. And it'll be harder to find exactly what you're looking for. But between those two options, I think you're going to be just fine in finding some test rides.
Yeah. And again, I think it's one of those things where we acknowledge that this is probably a shortcoming in the industry. Hopefully, the industry is working towards, remedying this in some way. But for right now, you do have some options out there. And if you have some friends that ride, it's always, that's how I got my first ride on a sport bike. We talked about that in a previous episode too. It was just like, swapping bikes with a friend and seeing what different models are out there.
All right. Well, hopefully that helps, Sam. High side, low side comment / question number 2. Spurgeon, you want to take this one?
This is Yarko, pronounced as it's spelled, which is Yarko. Yarko sent an email in and said, I ride a Triumph Thruxton R, and the stock spoked wheels require a tube. Mm-hmm. I was wondering if you have any experience with trips on tube tires. Thanks and love the show.
Do you have any experience with long road trips on tube tires, Spurgeon?
Too many miles have been put under my mileage while using tube tires. So I think what Yarko is getting at here is that this is a very specific question, and it really revolves around if you take a road trip on a motorcycle with spoke wheels that require tube tires, you need to know how to fix a flat tire. Because if you're out there on your Triumph Thruxton R and you're 200 miles from a local dealership and you don't have the tools with you to fix it, you cannot just plug the tire. To fix a tube type tire, you have to take the wheel off the motorcycle, you have to take the inner tube out of the tire, and you have to either patch that or replace that, reassemble it, put it back in without pinching it, and then get it back in your motorcycle. So if I'm understanding Yarko's email correctly, he or she is asking about, how difficult is this, and is it something that, should deter from a road trip perhaps?
Right. And I would say the short answer is yes. It's harder. There's no two ways about it. If you have a tubeless tire on your motorcycle, it's much, much, much easier to fix on the side of the road. Period.
Especially if you're looking at I've gotten a flat tire.
Spurgeon goes on his Triumph road trip rant.
No, I'm not even going Bonneville T100. I'm going like a front tire on any of the adventure bikes that I know and love is a 21-inch front, and typically that's where I've gotten the most flat tires is on a 21-inch front adventure bike. You can fix it in like 30 minutes if you have the right tools with you, because it's a 21-inch rim. It's a soft tire. It's easy to get off there. It's not hard to break the bead. It's an easy fix in the world of fixing a tube-type flat tire. What Yarko is talking about is a Thruxton R tube-type fix. That's a 17-inch rim with sport bike rubber that's going to be a bit more not as flimsy as like a TKC80 for riding off-road.
Yeah. Especially it's not going to be particularly wide either. It's going to be kind of a narrower tire.
It's going to be a pain in the So to Zach's point, it's going to be harder to fix that if you get a flat. Not that I don't think you should take a road trip on your Thruxton R. However, you should at least know how to take the wheel off. So if you can limp down the road to a regular service station, like any automotive garage, if you know how to take the wheel off and you have the tools to do that, their tire machine can help you break the bead. Their tire machine can help you, get the tire off the rim so you can put a new tube in and you can fix it that way. So having a little bit of knowledge, even if you can't do the whole thing yourself on the side of the road, having the right tools with you and the knowledge to be able to get the wheel off is going to be at least a big step in the right direction.
Yes. Yep, and I'm glad the way you phrased it too, Spurge, because we could one way to cover this question would be, well, just don't take a trip on a Thruxton because first of all, it's not very comfortable. And second of all, it's got tube tires and it's not really made for that. But we've also on this podcast, been the people who have said, whatever bike you have is the right bike for the trip. And I think that what you said, Spurgeon, makes a lot of sense. Just be ready and know how to do it if it happens. But also keep in mind that people have ridden around the world and back again on tube tires
years,
and it's
hundreds of years.
totally fine.
Yeah.
It's not just do it or shouldn't.
But it's not just a Thruxton R, right? Like if you're looking at a big V-twin American cruiser, like we talked about in this episode, a lot of those models have spoked wheels still. And if your bike is a 800-pound, Street Glide, and you're trying to figure out how to get the rear wheel off on the side of the road, like it's not just a plug and play patch if you have spoke wheels. And there's a lot of models out there that still utilize that form of wheel. Yeah. And just so we're clear too,
which makes it a good question.
Yeah, but just so we're clear too, there's a lot of models out there that you can't just look at it and say, well, that's a spoke wheel, it's going to have a tube. There are some models that have spoke wheels that don't require a tube because they have cross spoke wheels or other formats. So
mostly adventure bikes.
Yeah, do a little bit of homework and do a little bit of research, but don't let having a tube in your motorcycle deter you from a trip. I've done tens of thousands of miles on motorcycles with tubes in them, and knock on wood, I've always come back in one piece.
Right on. All right. Well, hopefully that helps, and that brings us to the end of yet another episode of High Side, Low Side. Any final thoughts, Spurgeon?
I have had a great time talking about modifying a motorcycle. I would say that if you are considering a new bike, we talked a lot about modifying motorcycles today, but much like Yarko and his spoke wheels, there are some considerations you should make before buying a motorcycle. And I think, we talked about Sam and the test riding, but like if you're going to do a lot of long distance traveling and the idea of fixing a flat tire on the side of the road scares you, then maybe don't buy a bike with spoke wheels. So while we talked a lot about motorcycles today, I think hopefully maybe what you learned are some of the do's and don'ts when choosing a motorcycle as well as modifying one.
Yeah, I like that. All right, everybody. Well, friendly reminder to leave a comment if you're watching on YouTube. Send us an email if you have any thoughts, comments, or concerns about High Side, Low Side. Send that email to highsidelowside@RevZilla.com. Subscribe, of course. Because,
if you have any concerns, just put CC Producer Chase. Don't address that to Zach or myself.
Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, which helps us out from a production standpoint. And, of course, we will choose one of you each time to give a T-shirt away to Like Old Fart, Young Heart. If you happen to fall asleep during this podcast recording, please do remember, Old Fart Young Heart, to send your preferred T-shirt size and mailing address to highsidelowside@RevZilla.com so we can send you some swag.
And with that, Zach and I, as well as Patrick, thank you for joining us for another episode of High Side, Low Side. As always, we'll see you next time.
Back to our day jobs.